Hey friends, welcome back to another night of TNL. It is great to be gathering together and I'm super excited to be here with all of you. My name's Ellie. I'm studying a Bachelor of Paramedicine, as you could probably tell. We are coming to you live from Bathurst tonight, and there's lots of us in the room, but we'd also like to welcome you if you're watching online. We know there's a few of our friends who are at home for various reasons, so thank you for joining us. And if you're going to watch it later, also welcome to you as well. We're going to do a lot of things tonight. We're going to have a Bible talk and a Bible reading. Then we're going to have a Q&A later on. And the way that you're going to ask your questions is through this little Slido. Thank you very much, Tash. There's a QR code if you want to scan it, if you're in the room. Or if you're online, there's just that little code that you can put in if you go to the website, slido.com. So feel free to submit your questions all through the talk and during the Q&A, and we will ask them to Seno and Ryan and see what they can come up with. But first, we're going to have a Bible reading, and Hayley is going to do that for us. So yeah, open your Bibles up to John chapter 11. And she's going to come up.
Right, so we're reading from John chapter 11, and we're going verses 1 to 44. Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. It was Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent to him, saying, Lord, he whom you love is ill. But when Jesus heard it, he said, This illness does not lead to death. It is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Then after this, he said to the disciples, Let us go to Judea again. The disciples said to him, Rabbi, the Jews were just now seeking to stone you, and are you going there again? Jesus answered, Are there not 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble, because he sees the light of this world. But if anyone walks in the night, he stumbles, because the light is not in him. After saying these things, he said to them, Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go to awaken him. The disciples said to him, Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he will recover. Now Jesus had spoken of his death, but they thought that he meant taking rest in sleep. Then Jesus told them plainly, Lazarus has died, and for your sake I am glad that I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him. So Thomas, called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, Let us also go, that we may die with him. Now when Jesus came, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles off, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them concerning their brother. So when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him, but Mary remained seated in the house. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you. Jesus said to her, Your brother will rise again. Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? She said to him, Yes, Lord. I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is coming into the world. When she had said this, she went and called her sister Mary, saying in private, The teacher is here and is calling you. And when she heard it, she rose quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come into the village, but he was still in the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who were with her in the house consoling her saw Mary rise quickly and go out, they followed her, supposing that she was going to the tomb to weep there. Now when Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet, saying to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. And he said, Where have you laid him? They said to him, Lord, come and see. Jesus wept. So the Jews said, See how we loved him. But some of them said, Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man also have kept this man from dying? Then Jesus, deeply moved again, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone lay against it. Jesus said, Take away the stone. Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, Lord, by this time there will be an odour, for he has been dead 4 days. Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone, and Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this on account of the people standing around, that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The man who had died came out, his hands and feet bound with linen strips and his face wrapped with a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go."
Holy ground. All of a sudden, it's really bright in here. In 2012, Jose Salvador Alvarenga went fishing with a friend. He's an Ecuadorian. And as they were out fishing in their small boat, a storm came up and they were lost at sea. Now, the boat was cast adrift. Everything was bust. There was no navigation, there was no steering, there was no motor, there was no communication. They were completely and totally cut off from the world and adrift at sea. Jose's friend very quickly gave up and died. And so did his family and friends. I mean, he had very little food or water in the boat. You can imagine he's just gone out for a day's fishing. And so eventually, after a few weeks, they, I guess, kind of mourned for him and grieved and had a funeral service. And that was it. He was gone. Fast forward 14 months, 10,000 kilometres away across the Pacific Ocean, in the Marshall Islands, a small boat washes up on an island containing a very much alive Jose Salvador Alvarenga. He had lasted 14 months in that boat. Slightly crazy and with a lush beard. He'd lived. Can you imagine being his family, his wife and kids, his mum and dad and his friends? People who had no hope. It's 14 months. He was dead. He was gone. And he's discovered alive. Can you imagine how incredible that would be? Life from the dead. Well, today we are looking at a story about Jesus, a story from John's Gospel of Jesus that blows the story of Jose Salvador Alvarenga out of the water. Literally a story of life from the dead. And it is so good, we're going to tell it twice tonight. And so let's set the scene again. Have a look at just the opening scene of this story in chapter 11. Let me remind you. John says, a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, a village of Mary and her sister Martha. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. And so the sister sent word to Jesus, Lord, the one you love is sick. So there's the basic story. And there's this family who Jesus knows very well. So the two sisters there's several episodes in the different Gospels that mention this family and these people. There's meals at their house. There's the episode with the hair. We don't actually know her name from that episode, but here John tells us that this was the one who did that at this meal where she literally kind of dried his feet with her hair. And so this family are very well known to Jesus. They're very good friends. And Lazarus is sick. And so they call Jesus because what do they know about Jesus is that he can help. That is something they know above all other things, that they've watched Jesus do incredible stuff in terms of healing the sick. They know he can help. But he doesn't come. He's not there for them. And so Lazarus dies. In fact, Jesus arrives 4 days after he's buried. And that's got to be a kick in the guts. You can imagine them sitting there. I don't know if you've ever been to a house of mourning, if you've been to a home where someone has died that day. I have a few times, and sat around with my family or someone else's family, and we've talked sometimes, or just sat in quiet, or someone else has arrived and there's more tears. It's a house of grieving, and they've sat in this house for 4 days. And you can imagine when they were talking in a desultory way, You can imagine them saying, you know, if Jesus had been here, this wouldn't have happened. Why didn't he come? Why didn't he come? Why didn't he come? And Jesus arrives in the middle of their grief, and that's exactly what comes up. In fact, it comes up 3 times. 3 times. Both sisters say exactly the same thing when they meet Jesus. In their grief, they blurt out, Lord, if you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died. And aren't they right? They're right, aren't they? So the 2 sisters say it, and then the crowd says it as well. The crowd says the same thing in verse 37. What do they say? Could not he have opened the eyes of the blind man, have kept this man from dying? Everyone knows what happened. You can imagine their grief and their frustration. And the thing is, Jesus is not immune to that himself. You can see that he feels the same grief they feel. And so in verse 33, have a look at verse 33. When Jesus saw her weeping, Mary weeping, and the Jews who'd come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. That's not just kind of an aloof observation. He's moved, he's grieved by it. The tears are springing to his eyes. And when he's brought to where he's laid and he sees the tomb, his first reaction is to share their grief. He weeps with them in verse 35, and the Jews say, see how he loved him. If only he'd been there. If only. But then something incredible happens. I think up to this point, the story is pretty much the same as any story of grief. I mean, apart from the kind, it wouldn't happen to me. They wouldn't say, Andrew, if you'd come here sooner, he wouldn't have died. But apart from that element, it's a similar story, right? It's a story that's told down through the ages of friends and family grieving over somebody who's lost. But then the story turns into something incredibly different. Verse 38. Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. Take away the stone, he said. But Lord, said Martha, the sister of the dead man, by this time there is a bad odour, for he's been in there 4 days. Then Jesus said, didn't I tell you that if you believe you'll see the glory of God? So they took away the stone, and Jesus looked up and said, Father, I thank you that you've heard me. I knew you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe you sent me. And when he had said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. I don't know how he said that. I was talking with some people just yesterday, the day before, about what's his tone. What kind of drama was that said with? I don't know. He just kind of shouts it out. And then the dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face, a bit like a mummy. And he walks out of the tomb, and Jesus says, take off the grave clothes and let him go. And all of a sudden, an ordinary story of death and grief turns into something else, something dramatically other. Jesus does the unthinkable, the unimaginable, the unbelievable. Can you imagine that moment? You know, somebody who's been given up for dead, they are dead. They didn't see the body of Jose Salvador Alvarenga. The family didn't see it. They just assumed he was gone. Lazarus, they buried. They had the funeral service. They saw him breathe his last. And yet he walks out of his tomb. Can you imagine that moment? Imagine what would it be like. It's just unbelievable. And yet, like all of Jesus' miracles, there is something more going on here. More than just a healing, more even than something as absolutely out of the box as raising someone back to life from the dead. There's a bigger picture. Because there's another setup to the story. It's not just the relationship of the family. There's something else going on. Come back to verse 3 and have a look. They sent word to Jesus, Lord, the one you love is sick. And when he heard this, Jesus said, this sickness will not end in death. Sorry, I'll just leave that with you for a moment. Their sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days, and then said to his disciples, let's go back to Judea. He loved them, and so he stayed. What's going on here? Jesus knows them, he loves them. He could do it, he's completely capable of fixing Lazarus, but he deliberately dawdles. He deliberately delays. Why does he do that? Well, he says it's for glory. It's so that people will be able to see the glory of God, so that Jesus can be seen for exactly who he is. And so he says, Lazarus is asleep in verse 11, and we're going to wake him up. Now that's a bit concerning for the disciples because Bethany's a risky place to go, right? There's these people who want to kill them all, and so they're kind of concerned. They're going, if he's just asleep, why don't we just stay awake? Because somebody else can wake him up. And so he kind of says, no, Lazarus is dead. Lazarus is dead. But how's that work? How is raising Lazarus going to reveal anything about Jesus? What will it reveal about Jesus? Well, I think what comes out is in the conversation in verse 21 that he has with Martha when she comes out to meet him on the road. Have a look at verse 21 again. It says, Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died, but I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. And Martha answered, I know he'll rise again in the resurrection at the last day. Jesus kind of, I think, hints at his plan with Martha in verse 23, but she just kind of rides over him. She says, look, yeah, of course he's going to rise from the dead. Of course he is. He's going to rise with everyone else at the resurrection on the last day, right? And this is one of those moments where we actually need to stop and have a think, because what they're saying here is something important, and it's something we often get wrong about Christianity and the Christian faith. A big mistake a lot of people make about Christianity is to think that Christianity says that when you die, you inherit a harp and a halo and you go sing la-di-da fancy harp songs in the clouds. And it's kind of a bit boring and ghosty, but that's what it is. That's eternity. And it's kind of a bit unattractive. They think that when you die, you become some kind of free spirit floating somewhere. But friends, that is not Christianity. That's not what Christianity teaches. It's not what's at the heart of the Christian faith. No, Christians believe in the resurrection of the dead. Right? We believe in the resurrection of the dead. That one day, after we've died, we will rise from the dead in real bodies to real life. Because Christians believe that life is more than simply biology. It's more than simply food and drink. It's more than simply reproduction. It's more than simply the blink reflex and kind of material reality and survival of the fittest. No, life is so much more than that. Life is what keeps you awake at night, wondering about the whys of your life and your purpose. Life is when we ask that question, what should I do today? Just not what will happen to me today. Life is when we talk about love instead of just making love. Life is wearing clothes for the way they look. Look at my clothes. Not just functionality. Life is eating for pleasure, from a Porto's apparently, and not just eating for sustenance. Life is painting the great pictures and building the big bridges. Life is that sense of who we are, not just what we are. Life means something. That's what Christians mean when they talk about life. But even more than that, life confronts us with death. Life confronts us with death. And we sense that that's not right. See, all of us who are living, the one thing we know about ourselves is We are going to cark it one day. I'm going to die. A lot sooner than you, probably. Could be any time. Get yourselves ready. Now, that's okay biologically thinking, right? That makes sense, okay? I get the sense, the biological sense of living and then dying. But what about me? What about myself? What about who I am? What about the relationships I've had through my life? What about love and joy and relationship? It feels wrong. I guess it makes sense, biologically speaking, I'm going to die, but it doesn't seem to make sense to me intellectually that my existence, who I am, is going to be snuffed out. The relationships I have are going to end decisively. There's a famous place in the Bible where the Bible says, God has put eternity in the hearts of men, but they cannot fathom the beginning from the end. It seems unfair, doesn't it? That we have this sense that life should be more, that life should go on, that life is more than this, and yet we cannot grab hold of it. We have no access to it. And that's what Jesus is talking about here. That's what Jesus and Martha are talking about here. They're talking about resurrection, this idea of real life, of life that goes on. The Christian belief in the resurrection is an affirmation of life, that your life is important and that life is meant to endure, that grief is not the right thing. Grief is not fitting. And grief should and will end because we're not meant for this. And when they say that Lazarus will rise, when Jesus says Lazarus will rise, Martha says, well, sure, I believe in the resurrection because that's what I believe, because that's what Christians have always believed. That's what we believe in life, in resurrection. But in this moment, Jesus says something different to Martha. He says, yeah, but, this is the moment where I'm going to reveal my glory. So have a look at verses 25 and 26. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? There's way too many believes in there. But you get it, don't you? I am the resurrection and the life. The one who comes to me, the one who entrusts themselves to me, that's what believe means here, they will live even though they die. The resurrection is not some distant thing, Jesus says. The resurrection is standing in front of you right now. You can touch it. I'm here. Because God's King is here. And Jesus says, I am the one who will give life beyond the grave. Real life. Eternal life. The life that we were meant to have. The life that makes sense of who we are. The eternity that is in our heart that we can't seem to grab hold of. That's what Jesus is offering. No more grief. No more pain of loss. The joy of life. Now, everyone dies. But those who believe in Jesus, he says, will live beyond the grave. And if they live believing in Jesus, then they will never die again. That's a pretty big claim, isn't it? Pretty big claim. But this is the life that we are all longing for and hoping for. So if we scoff at Jesus, I guess we scoff at ourselves in this moment. Because, well, this is what torments our grief, this longing for life. And Jesus says, do you believe me? Do you believe? It's a great question, isn't it? Martha says yes in verse 27. Now I get it. I get it. I understand who you are. I believe that you are the Messiah, the Christ, the Son of God, who is to come into the world. I know who I'm standing in front of, and I'm with you all the way, she says to Jesus. And to prove that, prove that that's who he is, Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead. Simple, very simple, isn't it? Just a couple of words, but dramatic. He calls out and Lazarus comes. Imagine what that would be like, standing outside the grave, the tomb, in a crowd, because they all came. You know, when Mary went out to Jesus, the crowd came with her, and so everyone's there, right? All these people who've been weeping and mourning, they come, and I don't know if some of them are kind of sniggering behind their hands when he says, roll the stone away. They're going, what the hell? And he does, and Jesus says the words, and this figure comes out with, like they've literally wrapped him in stuff. He's like a mummy. What would that moment have been like? What would it have been like? You see, there's more going on here than Jesus just raising his friend to life, because he feels guilty that he came late, and so he has to do an especially awesome party trick. Jesus raising Lazarus is making a statement. At the end of a whole lot of statements through this story of his life. A statement about himself, that he truly is God's great king, the one who comes into the world to bring life from the dead. The resurrection and the life. Do you believe that? Do you believe that? It's that simple. But Lazarus is only a sign, a pointer. He's not the beginning of the resurrection. Unless he's hiding somewhere in the world, I'm pretty sure Lazarus died at some point later on. Okay? He's not the beginning of the resurrection of the dead. He's not the reality of the resurrection. But he is a sign. He's a big sign that's pointing in a direction. He's pointing to Jesus. The resurrection of Jesus from the dead, that Sunday morning that he rose from the dead 2,000 years ago, he rose never to die. He is hiding somewhere today. No, he's arisen and ascended. He's ruling today. Jesus, God's great King, rose never to die. And that's how we know the truth of what he says here. I am the resurrection and the life. Because he is risen and the day of resurrection has begun because of that. Do you long to live? Do you long to know what life really is? And what life is for? Then come to Jesus. Because through him you can be part of this. Part of the resurrection, part of the fulfillment of what you know your life is meant to be about. What you long for but can't grasp. And Jesus' question for Martha there in verse 26 is a question he asks us to right down through the ages. It echoes out to us today. The King has died and is risen. And he raises the dead. And he says to us, do you believe me? Do you trust me? That you will live even after you die. That you will never die again. Now maybe you don't. Maybe you don't believe that. Maybe that is just too much for you. It's too far-fetched. It's too hard, too slippery to take hold of. But friends, this is the great promise of Christianity. It's the great problem of our lives. Real life. Eternal life. It's the challenge of Christianity to all of us. Where is life if it's not here? If this is not it, where is real life? And so if you're struggling to grab hold of this, well then, friend, ask questions. Ask them. Get the Slido code, chuck them on, ask us the questions. No guarantees of good answers, but you should be asking them. Because this, friends, is too good to miss out on. It is just too good to miss out on. Lots of people are shy of Christianity. They feel like it'll cramp their style. And it is true that Jesus is a king who asks us to treat him as a king, to follow him. But friends, look what he offers. Look what he offers. Everything. Everything. Real life. It's worth it. How about we pray? Oh, Lord God, we thank you for Jesus. We thank you that in Jesus we see the great King that you sent to save. And not just to kind of save us from the little stuff, but to bring us from death to life, to raise us from the dead. We thank you for the promise of Jesus that says if we come to him, if we entrust ourselves to him, if we acknowledge him as the great King and Lord, that he will raise us from the dead. That we can have the life we yearn for and long for in him. Help us to take hold of that. Amen. Okay, time for Tash time.
Hello. Thanks, Zeno. Don't forget, if you have any questions, then the Slido is open. You can vote for your favourite questions to boost them up to the top, so it's more likely they'll get answered. Our topic for Fun Facts today is garden gnomes. So, did you know that garden gnomes were first made in Germany in the 1800s? And as of 2022, there are currently over 25 million garden gnomes in existence in Germany alone. My second fun fact is that there's a 75% chance that the garden gnomes that you have are alive and plotting to kill you. My third fun fact is that in 2021, when the Suez Canal got blocked by that boat and it became a meme, that created a great shortage of garden gnomes, and there was a period of 6 months where there were no new gnomes found in the UK because they couldn't get the raw materials to make them. And lastly, my joke for you, did you know that the average height for garden gnomes is 30 to 60 centimetres? It's a gnome fact. Thank you.
Oh dear. Thank you very much, Tash. I was going to sit in that seat, Sino.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's fine. I just feel like we always have the question asker on this side, but all good. We are up to our Q&A. As Tash said, if you've got questions, chuck them in. Ryan put the code in the comments for the YouTube. Thank you for doing that. And feel free to ask questions that aren't related to the passage or tonight as well, if you would like. I'm here with Ryan and Seno, in case you guys haven't met them. And before we get into the serious questions, I have a not serious one for you. Right. Ryan's heard this, but Seno, you haven't. Okay. Would you rather have, it's a would you rather have kneecaps for eyes or eyes for kneecaps? It's from Charlotte. I've been thinking about it
I'll go kneecaps for eyes. No, eyes for kneecaps, sorry. Eyes for kneecaps.
Eyes for kneecaps.
I think that'd be pretty cool, although I feel like something would happen to my ability to use my legs.
Yeah, structurally, yeah.
I feel like the alternative is you're blind.
You're right.
So.
And what would you do with kneecaps on your face?
Well,
you'd have no weaknesses in your skull.
At the very least, you made eyes for kneecaps. They can call me Four Eyes, and I could read more, I guess, or do something like that.
Yeah, that's true. So you reckon it'd be more useful?
I don't know.
Oh, okay.
No, it wouldn't be useful. None of it would be useful.
Okay. That's fair.
You asked the question.
Ryan, do you have an answer?
Yeah, I would totally have eyes for kneecaps. I don't want to be blind.
Okay. Are you happy to not walk properly?
Yeah, I think I can manage that.
Okay. Fair. Thank you, Charlotte, for your question.
I just think, maybe people could write in and see if there are any advantages to kneecaps for eyes.
Oh, sure, yes.
What might you be able to get for that?
Yes, good point.
Nobody could do that to you.
Yeah, no weaknesses in your skull. Yeah, this is true. Okay, we have.
Would you have to wear glasses on both?
They can call you eight eyes.
Oh my gosh, that is a great question. I have no idea. Oh dear. You can submit that as a question in the Slido if you would like. Yeah. Okay, our top number voted question is, considering the time of this narrative, what would it have meant for Martha and Mary practically if Lazarus remained dead?
That's a good question.
It is.
I don't know, but I imagine it would mean poverty.
Okay, sure.
So I'm not sure what the arrangements are, but if there's two sisters and a brother living together, then they don't have husbands. That may have something to do with the fact, with the circumstances. Like, we know a little bit about them. We certainly know something about Mary, and she was not in a great position when she first met Jesus. And so it seems like this family has gathered together, and it's most likely that Lazarus would have been the main breadwinner.
Sure.
And so it's like the widow of Nain's son, when he dies, she's probably left destitute. And so that will probably be the case for the sisters too. They'd be left scrambling to make ends meet.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Otherwise, emotionally, they would be the same as any other grief-stricken family.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, yeah. Cool. Good question. The next one is, why was Jesus grieving? Didn't he know he was going to resurrect Lazarus? Or was it just seeing the effect of Lazarus' death on his family?
Good question.
I asked you a similar one. Do you remember? I said, why did Jesus weep? And you said, ask it later.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's probably a bit of both in there. I think you can still be grieved about something you know is coming. Things can still be upsetting in that way. So I think, in one sense, whether he knew the outcome that was coming, like we all know that, as Christians, we know that one day, whoever does die will be raised, but that doesn't mean we're not sad or we don't mourn when they do pass, despite knowing the final outcome. And so in that sense, I think there's a place for mourning, there's a place for sadness, and I think Jesus shows it here. But I think it does say that he was moved by deeply moved by the emotions and the reactions of the people around him.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's probably
I think Jesus is not a superhero, he's a person. Or at least, although these days we humanise our superheroes as well. But I think Ryan's right, basically, yeah.
Okay.
He, like us, feels the same way about evil. And you see this, I mean, he interacts with us as a real person, and he feels about things the same way we feel about them. We hate evil and injustice. We see the awful things that happen and we're grieved by them. So, I think this is one of those things with Jesus. When you read through the Gospels, you can read through them and you can just kind of jump from one factoid to the next. But if you actually read the stories, you see a word jump out, and that word that jumps out, I think, in the narrative is compassion. Over and over again, Jesus shows compassion. He's not aloof. He's not like those those pictures where he looks like he's on some kind of drug. Jesus is staring unemotionally at everyone.
Yeah.
No, he's engaged with people and he cares about them.
Do you think there's a question I've got is, do you think there's a reason that he cries in this story and not in other like you mentioned the widow of Nain?
Yeah, because he loved them. They were special friends, right? We all I went to a funeral a few weeks ago of the father of a friend from church. I went to help them out. I didn't feel terribly much grief. I felt for them, but I didn't feel much grief. But the very next week, 7 days later, I went to the a funeral of a close family friend. I felt that a lot more. And Jesus is no different. He's a real person. He had real people he was really close to. And so, yeah, I think he says it a couple of times. He loved him. So.
Cool. The next one is, how can any illness curable...
It's a serious question.
Yes. Curable... Let me start again.
Setting the mood.
Ask the question.
How can any illness, curable by resuscitation or not, be for the glory of God? Did Jesus just use Lazarus, someone he loved, as a pawn for his teaching?
No.
Okay.
No, you go on. You go on, mate.
I'll talk about the glory of God bit, I think. It's probably helpful to remember what glory of God is, or what glory is.
Yes.
Glory is it quite literally weightiness?
It is quite literally, yes.
And so it's the majesty, it's the power, the awesomeness of something. I like to think of, you walk into like Barcelona, like a football team, and you into their like Hall of Fame trophy cabinet, right? And you see all the things that they've won, right? That's their glory. That's showing off just how amazing. That's how incredible that they are. And so I think the illness, I don't think, is the glory of God, and it's not the fact that Lazarus dies in this story that's the glory of God or showing off his power. It's what Jesus does with it. The fact that Jesus can cure these things, that he can resurrect people and bring people back from the dead, that shows his mightiness, maybe is the right word there. And so you look at that and you go, oh, that's the power of God on display. That's his glory, because you're seeing that.
Yeah. So there's no doubt Jesus makes deliberate choices about what he does here. That means it kind of, when you actually read, you think, well, he waited 2 days, but Lazarus was in the grave 4 days, so maybe he actually would have died anyway, but he wanted to make sure he was certainly dead and beyond any sense of people going, oh, he's just waking up. And so I think quite likely Lazarus would have died before he got there anyway. But I think also, this comes back to the question of, in a sense, about all evil and all wrong, because he comes to announce a day of resurrection when all this thing will be done with. But the world he comes to is a world in which all this happens. And so how many people does Jesus heal in his lifetime? It's a vanishingly small number, even if it's thousands, right? It's a small number compared to all the people in the world at that time. And so, you could say he allowed all that to happen. But in some ways it's a bit of an empty argument, because what he's come to do is to do away with all of that, grief and pain. So, yeah. I'm not sure we've answered that question terribly well, but...
If you want to ask any follow-up questions, you can chuck them in. Or also just stick your hand up if you're in the room and you prefer to ask them that way. Also, people are doing a great job of voting for questions. Some of these have a lot of votes. So the next one is, how do we deal with the death of non-Christian friends and family?
With great sadness.
Yeah.
One thing I would say is it's not any of our jobs to pronounce final judgment on anyone. I don't know how God deals with and will deal with any single person. Okay, it's not that I can say. I'm not trying to say that everybody will be in heaven one day, but I'm trying to say it's not my job to condemn someone to hell. I have no ability, power to pronounce that, or to know ultimately how they have dealt with God in their life or in their final moments. And so I've got to be careful. But I think in general, when you have friends and family who aren't Christian, it's a great grief, and it's those moments where it becomes real to us. You can you just live on. With your family and your friends, you just live with them, and you live your life with them, and you go through the joys and sorrows. But it's at these moments where it really hurts. Yeah. And that's why I think in the Bible, in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, when it talks about grief, it says we don't grieve as those who have no hope. And I think often with friends who aren't Christians, that's what we feel like. We're grieving for people who have no hope, and it's bitter. Yeah.
You don't want to add anything, Ryan?
Nothing extra, I don't think. I recently went through this. So I lost my best friend a couple of years back to suicide, and whether or not he was a Christian, I can't say for sure. And so there's a sense in which I hope, but a lot of it is just grief and sadness. Yeah. So how do you deal with that? Well, you grieve, really. You talk to the people around you in your grief. You don't do it alone. And yeah, I think you just got to keep going from there in a lot of ways.
Tough.
Yeah, it is hard.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. This next one is asked by someone who's put their name as Seno's Fashion Sense, just so you know. The question is sacrifice a fundamental part of being Christian, e.g. quitting bad habits? Seems we are guaranteed to suffer. Jesus was perfect and was brutally sacrificed.
I think the answer is yes.
Yep.
Jesus says, "Follow me," and that's a imitative kind of thing he's asking. He's saying, "Be like me," and the part of his character was he sacrificed. He both suffered and sacrificed. So he suffered, which which are things that happen to him, but he also gave himself, which is what we mean by sacrifice. So sacrifice is a cost you voluntarily take on. Suffering is something that occurs to you, and both of those things I think are true of the Christian life in particular. They can be true of any life, of course, but they are part of the definition of what it means to be Christian, I think, yes. And so we're called on to make sacrifices.
Romans 12, chapter 1, Paul urges us to offer us our own bodies up as living sacrifices. And so as we...
we're getting into getaway territory.
Come to Getaway this weekend. To align your life for the sake of and under the sovereignty of Christ will mean that you have to suffer and give things up and go through hardships that you may not have otherwise.
I think to some extent all of us understand the ideas of suffering and sacrifice, because sacrifice is needed to gain. And the world we live in very openly talks about sacrifice for the sake of personal gain. So you think of Olympians and the sacrifices they make in their lives in order to win gold, and not just a hunk of gold, but esteem and prestige and money and glory. Parents make sacrifices for their children, but that's in a sense a selfish sacrifice. We sacrifice in order to build our family and do those things. So we're making personal sacrifices, but in order to build the family name or the help our progeny. I think the real distinction with the Christian faith is we make sacrifices for our enemies. We make sacrifices for those who are aliens to us. And Christians have always been those people who've gone out of their way, not just for their friends and family, but for the outsider and the alien, the stranger, the enemy. What's Jesus famous for saying? Love your enemies. Do good to those who harm you and hurt you. And that's been the distinctive of the Christian faith. And that kind of sacrifice is a very different quality of thing. It's a very different thing to contemplate. We most often say, why would I do something? Why would I give up for that person? And the answer is, because that's exactly what God did for us. We will, once again, if you're going to get away, we'll get into this on the weekend.
Yeah, cool. That's good to know.
So come.
Register. Okay. We probably have time for like 2 more-ish. In the passage, it stated that Jesus loved Lazarus. Would this kind of love be different to the love he has for the rest of us?
Yes, I think. It's the love of one friend for another. So I think I guess it's the difference between a particular and a general in that sense. I think Christians would say Jesus loves us particularly. But I guess the relationship he has with Lazarus is a defined one in a different way. It's more like a friendship that we might have with each other. It's just a different kind of thing. So it's a unique kind of thing. He had that particular relationship with those particular people. Yes, he loves you. If you come to Jesus, he's the kind of king who loves his people, and so he loves you, not in some kind of aloof way, but in a very particular way. But his relationship with Lazarus was different. And
that's not to say that Jesus wouldn't do anything for Lazarus that he wouldn't do for us.
Yeah, well, he did, didn't he?
Yeah.
What he did for Lazarus in the end, he also did for us. So that's where it's not different. So it is and it isn't.
There's so many good ones. And we don't have time, and they're all about the passage. But maybe in future weeks we can come back to them, or maybe if people want to come and chat to you in person, they can do that after tonight. The last one that we're going to do is, why are you a Christian?
I remember when I was at uni, I lived with a few blokes in a house, and one of the guys was struggling in his life, and he asked me one day, why are you still a Christian? And the thing I said to him then was, because it's still true. Because I wake up every morning, doesn't matter how I feel about it, doesn't matter what I'm facing that day, doesn't matter what happened to me yesterday, Jesus still rose from the dead. He still died for me. And if that's true, how can I not? How can I not be? At Jen and Aidan's wedding, one of their friends was at our table and he asked me, why are you a Christian? And I said, because of forgiveness. How could you not want forgiveness? Jesus offers you forgiveness. Now, think about that. Think about who you are and the things that you've done, the things that you'll never tell anyone else. How could you not want that? Anyway, what do you reckon?
I think I relate to that a lot, particularly the truth aspect to it. But I think another part for me in terms of my life is hope. It's a big one for me, that without it, if Christ didn't really rise from the dead, if he isn't really who he says he is, I struggle to see much hope, whether it be in terms of justice in the world or in terms of where I go after I die, or even who I am and what my purposes are. I feel like I would be lost.
What about you, Ellie?
Ryan related to like the truth bit of what you were saying. I related to the like, how could you not, like, I can't see any other way of responding to what he's done. So, yeah. I think we're gonna have to call it. Sorry, friends. You asked so many good questions. That's all we've got time for. But yes, come and chat to these guys afterwards if you'd like to. We're gonna sign off. So we will see you next week.